All right, I'm excited to be here today with my new friend, Will Cuming. So Will is a platinum certified artist, the visionary behind Community Music Tech's platform. They're redefining artist independence in the music industry. He's known for his triple threat talents. He's toured with major acts like Glass Animals while driving innovation in the music ecosystem. And I'm excited to connect with them today about building sustainable artist careers. So right now, technology is really going through a revolution as it relates to AI, and also ever since the internet's happened and streaming, it's a lot of things have been changing for artists. And so the topic of building sustainable artist careers is something we talk about a lot here on the podcast. So I'm looking forward to hearing from your perspective and insights and experience, Will. So thank you for taking the time to be here today.
No worries. Thanks for having me. What an introduction. Gotta live up to that now.
Looking forward to it. It's gonna be great. So maybe to kick things off, for anyone who this is their first time connecting with you, could you share a little bit about your journey of how you became a platinum certified artist and what the main mission that you set out to solve with community music?
It's been a bit of a winding journey, I suppose. Like originally, I actually studied jazz guitar as my undergraduate degree at university, and then I became a solo artist songwriter, which is sort of where that, some of that success came from as an artist, which is like largely what I'd always been. And then I moved to New York just before COVID with my wife. And during COVID, I took a real left turn on my career and started learning coding and doing a master's in analytics. And I guess I just didn't have anything to do. And I've always had an appetite for learning. I think also like learning music really is like learning how to learn a lot of the time. Some of the most amazing learners I've ever met through music. Yeah, and I suppose just it's always been a bit of a journey of curiosity. Learning a new instrument has always been something that excites me, and everything is kind of a new instrument, really, if you look at it a little more abstract. So I actually started being a classical flautist was my original thing when I was like younger, and then jazz guitar. And then from there, slowly added new things like learning songwriting and singing and toured a lot for a fair period there. But COVID, as it did for a lot of musicians, like kind of forced a lot of change. And then at first I thought maybe I was going to be leaving music with some of that change, and then realized that music needed more outside skills, I think, really for the industry. So I kind of found there were a lot of places that I could start to, I don't know, hone in on with like some new skill sets and things. That's probably largely how I got to roughly where I am like now, I suppose.
I mean, I can definitely relate with the journey of being a full-time musician and then discovering the world of software development and learning how to write code. I've been on that journey the past couple of years. I was a weird kid in high school, like math. So like there's something about coding that has really kind of scratched an itch that I had forgotten about. I don't know if you had that similar experience.
Growing up, I think I always had that thing that people would be like, oh, if you're good at music, you must be good at maths. And I always remember being like, I've met so many people in music who have such diverse approaches and mindsets, and I wouldn't say that everyone who's good at music is good at math. Or I'd say like some versions of people who love music are also, but I realize as I've gone into the technology stuff that I am absolutely someone who loves puzzles and maths. And my sister is also doing data science after doing originally an undergrad in music as well. So I think it's a bit of a family thing. Being a puzzles and math problems, I think we enjoy, like, I don't know, especially when you start to shine it back on some of the interesting data problems of music. I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, when you kind of, because I feel like in some ways that skill set feels very like peanut butter and jelly, or it's certainly like a lot of contrast versus the creativity of like making music, where it's like a different part of your brain. So it's cool when they can come together.
I was going to say, like, it's funny, people do say that they're different, but I don't know. I found like songwriting and like building software or different things is really not that different for me. Like, it doesn't feel like a different part of my brain that's working. It just feels like I'm applying the same thought, like the same kind of way of thinking to a new thing. Like, I always enjoyed the challenge of finding out what sort of music someone liked and trying to make something that they would enjoy, and like just trying to like get my head around, how to connect with people through songs, and really like that kind of way that I always really loved, like the two-way communication of music rather than just as a pure like mode of expression for myself. And then when it comes to building tools that people actually want to use, I've found that the fact that I love to like check how things, like how people use things. And I love to just, everyone in our company who uses the tools we're building, like they video a lot of what they're doing and just send me videos. I start every day by like watching those. And I love figuring out not necessarily what people tell you they want, because that's interesting as well, but watching and figuring out what people need to make their life, their day better is like a whole other skill set with that. But it doesn't feel actually as disconnected as I originally thought it would be, I guess.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and that's interesting. The point that you brought up too about paying attention to how people are communicating and what they're expressing, sometimes not necessarily on the nose, but like the deeper needs that they're expressing. It reminds me of, was it Henry Ford that's attributed to saying something like, if I gave people what they wanted, then we'd have faster horses, or they would ask for faster horses, or something like that.
Yeah, I can't remember. That's the one, and I agree. I think like there's so much amazing input from people, but like I think sometimes people think when you're saying that you listen to people that you're suggesting like design by committee, like what you're suggesting. But I think there's such a beautiful middle ground of the two, where software is such a brutal proponent of like, if you build something for 2 years and then you check if someone wants it, like if they don't want it, you've just wasted 2 years and you've probably spent a lot of money. Whereas in music, I think because it's so hyper competitive and things, we kind of like fall back on this idea of, well, I don't know if it's going to be successful or not. So at least I was honest with myself about it. So maybe like, but you can't really take that exact approach with investors and things on a software project,
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Yeah, it seems like it's easier to articulate our challenges or like frustrations or issues because those are much more direct. They're like part of our like everyday experience. Like if we're running into something, we like know exactly what it is. Whereas like the dreams or like the opposite end of it is sort of more abstract because it's like it's an idea or it's like further away from reality. So that maybe that's part of why it's like harder to communicate those sometimes.
I think so. And I think there's such a fascinating thing around data that like on a very base level, sometimes people get a bit like, they think you're being robotic when you're thinking about data. Like, oh, we looked at this thing and there's this many streams, so we need to be changing our strategy in this way. But like, if you really think about it, like numbers and data is absolutely just an abstraction of people. And it's just one input because there's so much of the picture that's not even captured anyway. So you'd be kind of a bit silly, I think, to look at the data and then decide everything entirely based on very limited data sets. But I do think it's really fascinating when you start to look at it and go, well, I mean, for me, I don't think of the numbers and music just as like people are consuming this much music, so we want them to consume more. I'm more interested in like, why do we listen to music? Like, why do we listen to the things we want to listen to? Why do we tell people about certain things we listen to and not other things we listen to? Like, what are all the like kind of more deeper human connectivity and identity things that come with it? And I think those questions start to make like analytics a really interesting and curious conversation, as opposed to like feeling like you're sitting through like an accounting meeting sort of thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, connecting analytics to like the heart. Cool. You having both perspective as an artist yourself and having built this company and having conversations every day with your team, with artists. I'm curious, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges or issues that are kind of facing the market right now as it relates to indie artists or just artists in general that are looking to build a career?
That's a great question. I'm sure that it's very different for a lot of people, and some people who listen will probably be like, that's not my experience at all. Like, I'm thinking about this. But I do a lot of interviews with people because like artists and different people, because I want to try to get to the bottom of that. I'd say there's a few things. Like one is like clearly there's like an enormous saturation of art. Like there's more art being created and released than ever before in the history of the world. Obviously, there's kind of like the positive spin of that is that it's easier and cheaper to release than it's ever been at the same time. So you've kind of got like much freer open markets, I suppose, in some ways. But with that and the sort of movement from like a gatekeeper version of things to like now, if you make great content, you will be rewarded. And there's no real gatekeeper. There's really just the software engineers or the data science team at Instagram who design the algorithm. Like sort of new set of rules that dictate how you reach your audience and sustainably. So I think a lot of the challenges people face really are like, it's hard to build sustainable businesses, but for different reasons than it was before. Like maybe some reasons that like label deals, some of them in some parts of the industry really haven't changed that much, even though what they're offering has completely changed in the last 30 years. but there's still labels, just throwing money behind something and then taking 80% on a recording deal. Like that's not like a non-existent deal anymore. Obviously there's more indie artists, but yeah, I'd say like the main pieces, if I was trying to bring it back and focus a little bit more, because I can lose my train of thought on those things. I think that there's a lot of like artists are trying to balance, am I a media personality or am I an artist? And how do I balance these two things of learning how to make great content and communicating there, and also making great art? Because it feels like generally you kind of have to, for most artists, you sort of have to have both. There are obviously some who succeed on one or the other, but the best ones seem to kind of get both those equations right. And then on top of that, yeah, there's so many jobs that you're doing now as an artist. And I'll extend that to managers too, because I think that they take on a lot of workload. But you're creating content, you're editing the content, you're doing your own digital marketing and advertising, and you're also making, like, you might be songwriting, producing, and performing. You might be taking your own photos, making videos, and then you're playing shows and touring. Like that list of tasks you have to do can feel pretty overwhelming. And then the advice from a lot of people is like, you have to do all of them. So I'd say those are some of the problems. And from a technology perspective, I hope this isn't too long of an answer, but from a tech perspective, I think there's a lot of interesting microservice tools that are starting to emerge, but it's hard because you still have to input data in 5 or 6 different places. You still have to look at 6 different analytics tools to figure out how your career is going. So I think there's a lot of learning that comes with the job, and there's not a lot of tools yet. And this is where we're trying to aim. But there's not a lot of tools yet that are good at communicating with other tools and actually start to save us time on these tasks that make more room for creative time and also strategy time that hopefully grows your sustainable artist career.
Yeah, 100%. So it sounds like what you're saying is that some of the biggest challenges it's a double-sided sword, in that it's never before been easier to record music and it's never been cheaper to do it. But because of that, there's been this flood or this explosion of music, and learning how to cut through the noise becomes more and more challenging. And then at the same time, it's not just artists that are having that flood, but just like information tools in general and technology. And now there's so many different tools and platforms and things that it could feel overwhelming just trying to keep up and spinning all the different plates. Everything is kind of fractured. So
definitely. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack even just with that.
Yeah, 100%. And I know, like you mentioned, like this is really one of the core problems that you set out to solve. So I'd love to hear what you guys are working on right now, or what you've kind of found that's helping artists to kind of overcome that challenge.
Yeah, I mean, we're early days on the platform. I had been building, like I had a digital advertising marketing company I was running with my sister before this. And we were starting to build out a lot of like, I guess similar to some of the ad tech tools that sort of exist within music. But we were looking at that space at like originally we were just servicing clients and helping run their strategy for digital ads. And over time, I was learning more and more coding and just, automating pieces, building out reporting things. So I think like probably philosophically, the largest thing for me is like, I guess besides the lots of testing with the relevant people, that I just think there's a lot of really base level things that, like, I'm excited by Gen AI and things like that. They're really interesting from a conceptual perspective, but I think there's really basic stuff we haven't figured out before that, which is like really like fundamental thought that really helped us start off with the platform, is that I really think that anyone who's working on a release should be able to access a release. And that sounds really simple, but it's not in every platform. In fact, it's not in many platforms where, you log into an account through an email address and, well, if I need to share access to a manager, maybe I'll give them my login and I'll share the password and whatever. But actually, like when the manager logs in, they need to be able to flick between all their artists really quickly. When the label logs in, they need to be able to do the same thing, and they need to be able to look at analytics across their catalog. And for me as the artist, like I've released music through a sub-label of Unified, which is the owner of Community Music. I released through a sub-label of that before, and then now I have a new deal that's like not that. And through the Orchard, like we were originally working through the Orchard, like the label would have to log in and then report to me how things went. But actually, like I think like the pure fundamental thing of ownership within a platform is that, or maybe it's more access, because ownership is kind of contractually driven as well. But, the artist needs to be able to access the release. The label needs to be able to access the release. And then if there's a marketing agency working on it, well, they should be able to access the release and just download the assets from one spot. Like it sounds kind of really basic, but just like the artist should upload that information one time and then people can add what they add to it. But really, like at the moment, like the label sends an email to the manager, who sends an email to the artist, who sends an email to the graphic designer, who sends back an artwork all the way through that again. And then they get it and say, oh, it's the wrong format. They send an email all the way back. And then you end up spending days just chasing all these really basic asset things. And it's honestly just like, I've seen this in all parts of the music industry. Like in the digital marketing agency, we worked with so many artist teams, and you could see that like there's some really basic fundamentals around, well, the artist can save the label a lot of time. So then the label's now not spending time chasing metadata and assets. They're actually building a strategy. And I suppose like that's the fundamental thing. It sounds really basic, but I don't think many people do get that right. And then on top of that, I really want data ownership as well as the actual ownership of the object, of the release. Like analytics data, it's not just about providing CSV files to an artist and saying, cool, you own your data. It's actually helping them, sort of being a steward of the data, I suppose, where you're helping them store it and then use it in practical ways to get insights, to do practical things like maybe you start connecting to publishers and things over time where you don't have to like copy the information here, then copy it into your publisher's portal. And these things start to get automated out, the data entry side of it. And on top of that, there's no use giving people 100 CSV files and saying, here's all your streaming data. Like, what's an artist going to do with that if they don't know how to code or anything? You really want to be able to be building useful analytics, but also if they want to do ad hoc analytics, they can export it in a useful format and start to do stuff with that as well. So I guess there's some really fundamental things. There's a lot more to it that we're trying to like look at and build out, but we're still like early stages of what we're growing. And I want to get it right rather than trying to build 100 features poorly as well.
Awesome. That definitely makes sense. What comes to mind is the like Jenga analogy, where you want to make sure you have a good foundation, the fundamentals before you start building on top of it. Or if you build a house on sand, like as soon as a storm comes, it'll kind of just come crumbling down. So it sounds like what you're really focusing on is kind of building this initial foundation in place on a good surface first. And if I'm hearing you correctly, in terms of like the biggest, like one of the solutions, the challenge is just around the fundamentals of permissions, around making sure everyone that should have access to the assets is able to go to one place and have a source of truth rather than kind of passing around a bazillion different email chains. And so having one place where they can go, that they can organize things, frees up time and energy for the artist and for the manager, the record labels to really focus on the strategy. Awesome.
There's a really just interesting point on that. I think there's a huge problem. Like there's lots of problems being talked about. That one that doesn't really get talked about is like just how much unstructured data and manual data entry there is in the music industry. And as much as that sounds like such an unsexy problem, like it's just something that you end up spending a lot of time on. Like you have to register your songs with your PRO, you have to do this, and I know people are building out little tools and stuff, but the fact is there's not many ways to unify that thing, like connect the dots of different things and integrate them. I suppose that's like a big challenge of music that other industries have done a little better. Like maybe this is a simple example. And again, this isn't something I'm necessarily going to nail immediately either, but when you're buying a ticket to a show and then it says, do you want to sign up to third-party mailing lists or whatever? And like, it's worded in a way that's really cold, but like, that's the thing that you tick to like subscribe to the artist mailing list in that process. And I guess there's two things with that. One, like that's going to always be a low converting thing when it's such an awful offer. Like that's the first thing.
Do you want to join another email list?
Yeah, right. And who does? Like you really can't be asking people like in that kind of way. But yeah, the second thing is like, well, a lot of the time those emails get batched at the end of the tour, get sent out, and then they go, cool, we've added it to the mailing list. And then like 6 months later when they do their next tour, they'll send an email to them. Whereas like what you really want is like when someone makes that subscription, immediately like you get onboarded by an email that says, hey, thank you so much for signing up. Here's like me playing a song that you really love or whatever in an acoustic way. You can't see this anywhere else. Like it's just something I wanted you to say thanks, where you're starting to like, people use their email list a lot of the time. I think people are getting better at it, but a lot of the time people will send an email out that's like, here's a list of all our tour dates and all our merch. And people just, like, I think you just got to treat it like you're talking to your friend, because ultimately your fans are like people who they don't want that distance between you and them. There's this amazing anecdote. I'm going to get this totally wrong, but I think it's more about the concept of it. Someone was telling me, I was reading on like a blog somewhere, that apparently like the most opened email of all time was like during the Barack Obama campaign in 2008, where it was an email that went out. It says from Barack Obama, and it was just like all lowercase, like hey, like HEY. And it was just a plain text email. And whether or not this is even true, like I might have even read it somewhere and whatever, but it's such an interesting example that like artists are sending these, like, this is a pure tactical conversation as well as strategic, but an artist is sending out this really HTML heavy email with images and all this stuff, and then it's being blocked by like 50% of the spam filters or even more, and then they're going, well, no one really opens emails anyway. But then you look at some people who do really good direct marketing, and they are sending out a plain text email where they're just trying to connect in a real way. And then they're taking the time to build a relationship before they say, actually, also 4 emails down, I'm also offering this thing if you're interested. And they're getting like more than 50% open rates, because all of a sudden you're getting past the spam filter. You're writing like a normal person writing to their friend, as opposed to like, musicians, it might be hard like as an industry because it's oversaturated, but you also have the advantage that people literally want to hear from you. And if you're a company, you're never going to find that. Like no one really wants to hear from a company. They want to hear from people. So there's an advantage as well, I suppose, to being a musician.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think music is really sort of a unicorn in a lot of ways, where when I think of like even like social media profiles, like businesses, like sometimes people follow them, but they don't really like to follow them that much. Whereas like artists, like, they get a huge following. People love to hear from you, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the other challenges you're bringing up is around like unstructured data and just like having things connected in a way that's streamlined. That example of people signing up for an email list somewhere like on a platform that you don't even know what's happening like when they sign up, or you like aren't really connected with them, makes a lot of sense. Honestly, it's kind of hitting home to me right now too, because the first iteration of our app that we developed was pretty unstructured. The database was like open, it wasn't relational, and now that we've been kind of restructuring with a more solid foundation, now we have like a relational database and we have TypeScript and like all the good stuff that I'm like, oh my God, like how did I survive without like all this? And it's like what you're saying is like, that doesn't like the music industry like doesn't have that in a lot of cases, like all this unstructured, messy like data and like kind of connecting it together. Cool. One thing that we kind of opened the conversation with was just the topic in general of building a sustainable music career in today's day and age. And of course, with that comes the big question of around like, how do I make a sustainable income doing this? How do I monetize my music, especially if streaming isn't really paying as much as I need to be making in order to fund it? So I'm curious what your perspective is on that challenge for artists, and how can they generate a sustainable income with their music nowadays?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I certainly don't feel like I'm the only person who could or should answer it. I think there are multiple versions of this. Like I have some friends who they don't tour ever, and they just have a really good streaming audience because they've really released like a beautiful career of like a whole, like 10 years worth of great music that kind of all reinforces, like it's all within a really great universe. And those machine learning algorithms of Spotify reward you for doing that for consistently for a long period of time. So there are some versions of the business that can work like that. I suppose like you want to really think about what's in your control and what's not in your control as revenue streams. And then, managing your cost structures, I think, are really important too within a business. That artists, I think traditionally, like you have to be a bit delusional to have picked this path. Like I am absolutely delusional enough to think, this is a great idea, let's just do it. Like caution to the wind, So I think sometimes that doesn't always go with people that love to make a budget. And I think sustainability does have to come down to like, I guess I would look at it and just say, if your limitation is like, I can't spend too much money, like start to approach it like that, where you're try and build without spending on lots of PR and different things. And personally, I'm probably a bit critical of PR at most levels for an artist anyway. But yeah, in terms of sustainability, like you've obviously got like the D2C direct to consumer model where you're building your mailing list. You're trying to get more than a fraction of a cent out of each fan, the 1,000 true fans concept. And I think that is a really important part of your business, like as a revenue stream. And some people have survived without building that. But I think with the like hyper competitiveness that we now have and the oversaturation, that's the most in your control of any part of your business. And if you do that properly and you learn about like conversion pixels and things like that with marketing, where you can use ads and retarget properly, that can be a sustainable thing. In terms of the streaming model, sure, you can work with a good distributor or playlist pitches or, good ones that don't get you bots and things like that. And that can help, I guess, with the Spotify revenue conversation. You've got the issue of like, I don't know if this is a term that people kind of generally know, but like the cold start problem with an algorithm, where the algorithm on Spotify, the collaborative filtering kind of concept is that, if user A or user one likes A and B, then and user B likes A and B and C, well, then user one is also probably likely to like C, that sort of concept. But until you have enough data behind your music or your track or whatever, you're not going to get recommended. And I think the sustainable side of Spotify is once you get into the recommendation algorithms and you get support there. So like people use ad campaigns to try and fuel that growth, or like maybe pitching to editorial playlists, and hopefully that starts to lead to it. Or like the slow and steady path of building a fan base over like a few years. But yeah, I suppose to try to summarize that and not let it waffle on too long, there are multiple revenue streams that, if I was doing it all again now from like, my early 20s or something, I probably would try and have another job at the same time until that makes sense to make a shift. And I would spend a lot more time focusing on building my mailing list and things like that. Like, people might even go look at me. I don't really spend a heap of time marketing myself at this point, and I haven't really posted much at all for 5 years because I just went and learned coding as that was what I felt like was the path for me to grow a sustainable career path. But yeah, I guess in the long run, like, it's lonely to run a business on your own, which I have done for about 6 years with my own work. But I've also been profitable in that period because I have no one else, so no other mouths really to feed, except for like, some producers or people I've collaborated with. But yeah, you've kind of got the two paths of, do I go directly to my consumer, or do I play the game of trying to get, B2B support from Spotify, Apple, and touring? Well, I guess touring's kind of in the middle of the two, where it's still direct to consumer, but you're not really owning the relationship. Yeah, those are your paths, I suppose, you can take. And largely, as unpopular as this is, like the most important thing really is to just making sure that you're making the best art possible. That's really the biggest lever you have toward building a sustainable business, and then probably just not spending all your money. Yeah, that was a long-winded answer. I honestly thought we could talk about it for like 2 hours, so it's probably not a great answer, but hopefully it was okay.
Yeah, it's fantastic. No, I think it's super helpful, and I agree. I think that we could probably talk for for a full day on this. But to recap, it sounds like a few of the biggest opportunities are, one is around if you're connecting with your fans directly, trying to establish those true fans, so that instead of just earning a fraction of a penny per fan, you actually have more of a relationship with them. You can offer things. Maybe it's a VIP membership, or maybe it's a private house concert, or there's different things that you can offer that are much more valuable than like a fraction of a penny. So that's one direction. And also just in general, product, and this probably goes for every business, is that marketing can sort of prop up like a subpar product short term, but like really when you look at any like successful business long term, it's always because they've had like a product revolution and they just have the best product on the market, and the market eventually kind of finds that. And so there's a lot of truth in terms of just focusing on like creating great music, a great product. And product doesn't necessarily just have to be the music too. Like it could be also the offers and the things that you're creating, with this live shows or different offers.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And I think like maybe some good like some case studies to be thinking about are like the Chapel Roans and people like that of this world, that like if you look at how long that they just kind of honed their craft for, and then at some point it's just so good and it just kind of explodes, and everyone says, oh, overnight this thing came out of nowhere. But these people are spending a long time. They are building fans as they go, but probably more than anything, they're really like getting good at their craft, like getting amazing at their craft actually. And then I suppose like this is a bit of a scary thought because I think a lot of musicians, we kind of lack confidence as well a lot of the time. And when you are sort of the product, it comes with a lot of like mental challenges, I think, as well. But there is an element of, if you truly like think of your favorite artist, if you really are making songs as good as that artist, you have a really good chance that there are systems in place now that never were there before that actually can reward you without you needing to like have a major label deal. Like there are still people who would say, well, you need the major label deal, whatever. I've seen so many examples of that not being at all true. Like where there's artists who they really are just making beautiful, incredible music. I've got maybe a good example is my friend Dustin Tebbett, who's an Australian artist who he like hasn't had a manager for like 5 or so years now, and he just releases really beautiful folk music, like indie kind of folk, and he always kind of has more than like 1 million monthly listeners on Spotify because he had some work early on that really like it was just incredible work. It connected, and he's just kept exploring the world that he wanted to explore, building this really beautiful universe. And he doesn't really post much on socials or do any of that stuff, but he really, really makes incredible art that it's sustainable. You know, you could argue some various things that maybe he got in at the right time where there's less competition on Spotify, yada, yada. But if I really was being honest about my own work versus a song of his or something, I'd say like it's just an amazing song that he wrote, you know, and he produces, and like it's sustainable because he makes a lot of stuff. He mixes it himself a lot of the time. Like it is a sustainable model, but equally, like in the end, the art has to be just so good. And if it's not, I hate saying like if it's not, just go back to the drawing board, because I think people still need to be like feeling confident as they move forward through this journey. Like I'm not trying to be like a naysayer and say that you can't achieve it. It's just more like enjoy the journey and remember that if you make something that's truly great and it feels like 8 weeks later people aren't responding, it's possible that 6 years later it will start to really pop off when other work of yours is now starting to grow and build fans. So really it's more about consistently making the best work you can. That's kind of where I still come back to. Obviously, you got to do some marketing, but marketing is an amplifier, it's not a replacement for a great, like a song that people want to play at their wedding or at a funeral or at a really important moment in their life. Nothing can really replace. No amount of gimmick can suck me in to do that in the long run.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I can definitely relate to, because I think all of us like start out, it's not like anyone releases a song, their first song, and it's just like amazing. Like everyone kind of has to go through a phase where they release something and it has to kind of suck until like it doesn't suck anymore. And yeah, I remember our first album that we had recorded with my band. We were out of high school, and it was like we recorded it locally, and it was not good. You know, like in hindsight, like we were like, yeah, this is like pretty bad. But we thought it was amazing at the time. But like we did, we got our start by like walking up to fans, waiting in lines for shows, and introducing ourselves and sharing it. And we got our first 1,000 true fans with that CD. But like, if we had just like propped ourselves on that CD and like that was it, then there's no possible way that we would have been able to build a career. And we toured for about 10 years, and like there's no way we could have done it. But like also like you have to kind of acknowledge and embrace where you're at right now, and know that like like it isn't like wherever you're at, like you can get yourself out there. You can start taking the right steps to connect with people, and your product will improve, as long as you keep focusing on it. So it's hopefully not something people will feel discouraged about, but just sort of like, they understand that it's just about taking, consistent steps.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think sometimes when I talk about this, I'm a real optimist, but it sounds a little bit pessimistic perhaps, but I'm definitely more trying to say like, I guess 2 positives that come out of that is like, one, nobody really knows when you've written a great song or not. Like I think a lot of the time the stories that you hear, like sure, someone says like, I knew it was great, but a lot of the time I hear people say like the manager said to, like with Tones and I is a great example. She's an Australian artist who has that really big song Dance Monkey, and her manager said to her just before she released it, look, I know the last song went really well, but just tempering your expectations. Like if this one doesn't do that well, like don't stress about it. It's fine. And it's like the 4th most streamed song of all time now, I believe. So it's like, okay, well, A, like people often don't know where you're at with it, but B, I'm not trying to sound like a gambler with this either, but you might have to write that release to get to the next release, which might be the one that really starts to go somewhere. Like, they talk a lot about like quantity is how you achieve quality rather than necessarily, you're not trying to say, well, I won't release anything until it's perfect, because A, you just don't know if something's going to connect a lot of the time anyway. But B, like, you have to write lots of songs to eventually get to the ones that start to like do that. I guess you just want to be sustainable on the way, where like if you're starting like a 15-piece band, like it's probably going to be hard to be sustainable because you're just going to run out of money before you release or tour, like maybe the moment you start touring. So you're finding a way to have like something where you work within some limitations, like maybe it's like a smaller band setup, or you might have to tour solo for a while. But every time you tour, like you might not be all there yet, but every person you meet on that tour, every show you play, all these experiences are all going to lead to whatever you're next making anyway. So it's all snowballing into itself that, Chapel Roan didn't take 8 years to sit at home writing and then after 8 years released the best album of all time. It was a journey of lots and lots of releases, connecting to fans, learning about people themselves, and it's really fun, enjoying that journey. Like, you never know where these things are going to take you. I never thought I'd be building technology in music. Like 6 years ago, I would have thought, yeah, that'd be the first. I'd never written a line of code. So, it's definitely not to discourage. It's more just to say, just to be realistic, that spending like an extra 100,000 on promoting your new album might not be what's needed. Like, you might actually spend more time and energy just making more songs and just keep rolling through. And, if you make content and release stuff, you can usually tell organically if something's working quite well, and then you can kind of fan the flames a bit. So it's more of that. I hope that sort of maybe clarifies that thought, that I have all the optimism in the world that anyone can achieve amazing things within art. I just think, don't make your first EP and then spend 100,000 to promote it and then go, shit, I have no money left. I don't know what I'm going to do from here. Like, just kind of like ramp it up and watch as things go. Like, if people are responding really well, then maybe test out putting some ad spend into things and trying some things. But yeah, the main lever still is how good you can connect to your audience through your art and the experience of them engaging with your art. So that should actually give you a lot of confidence that the power is in your hands more than it has ever been, which is an exciting maybe way to think about it. More exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think you just articulated it like really well. And it actually reminded me of, it's kind of similar for like businesses or tech businesses too, where like, you could invest a lot of money or time or resources into building something that isn't necessarily like, there's not like a market fit, or like the product's not there. It's not for like providing value. But if you actually listen to people, you have conversations, you can kind of build it around that, then you can build that community more organically, and then you can start to pour gasoline on the fire. Cool. Well, man, this has been a really fun conversation. I appreciate you again taking the time to hop on here and share a little bit about your experience and insights that you've learned both from your music and also building this company. And for anyone that's listening or watching this right now who's interested in learning more about community music, what would be the best place for them to go to dive deeper?
I suppose, communitymusic.net is the site, and you can we're sort of in beta, so we're doing like apply for access kind of thing. But equally, like, I think for me, I'm really always open and interested to connect with I guess people who are trying to make art or trying ideas that are maybe a little different and things. So equally, like my Instagram is always a place that if someone wants to just like hit me up, I'm LANKS Music, which is my solo project, but I'm always an open resource, open book. If anyone wants to, I don't know, tell me that some of my views were stupid, or if they want to have a conversation about the future of music and tech, or want to share some of their own things they're building. Like, also like another conversation that we haven't really touched on, but I think there's a lot of musicians, like I learned a whole new path and skill set that it's exciting to see more artists and creators, more and more of them, like being involved in the design and building of the tech. So I particularly love connecting with people in those spaces as well. But yeah, I guess connect to me or go to the community site. Both are open to you.
Awesome. Well, like always, we'll put all the links in the show notes for easy access. And thank you then for taking time to be on the podcast today.
Thanks so much, Michael.
Yeah.